Hey, I'm Thane. I'm sitting here in a parking lot in Boulder, Colorado. It's 27 degrees, it's snowing, and I'm going to show you the sliding bike tray I have in the back of my van. So, a couple people have been asking about the dimensions and everything. So, the actual bike tray itself is about 38 inches long, lengthwise down the vehicle, and if I remember correctly, it's about 41 5/8 widthwise. Obviously this will depend on your van and everything you're trying to do with it. I decided to put my bikes kind of sideways across the vehicle. That was because I wanted to maximize space in here. You could put them lengthwise, but you know, I actually wanted to do yoga on the floor and I only have a 10-foot space, so to be able to lay down I had to put them sideways. And this is the way I also had them in my demo van. I used to have about 20 bikes in that, and that was all just behind the rear sliding door of my Sprinter van. So yeah, 20 bikes. It would be 2 tiers of bikes actually in a tall roof van. So you can fit a lot of bikes if you do this kind of staggered sideways configuration. And you can see there's not much space. Everything is real tight, but it all slides back and forth. So I'll talk about what I built everything out of. So these are Fulter 5400L drawer slides. They're 450 pound capacity. They're super solid. If I slide this tray all the way out, it will lock. It also locks when you push it all the way in, but you can push it down. It's moving just slightly back and forth, but it doesn't budge whatsoever. So under my floor here, you can see there's just some L-shaped brackets. They are from the hardware store like Home Depot. These are 3 screws that usually hold it in. I drilled them out and used some existing bolts that go into the floor of the van to tighten them down. So I basically just drilled a hole in those, use the existing bolts, and then these also have 3 mounting screw holes that go into the wood there. So I drilled away at the wood so it was recessed, and that this L bracket would mount flush into these little plywood strips. And these are 18mm Baltic birch plywood. It's not available at any of the big box hardware stores. It's only available at, say, a smaller lumber yard. It's quite expensive, but it's also super strong and it's less prone to warping. Baltic birch, it comes in like 5x5 and 4x8 foot pieces. So those are just screwed in. I think there's about 5 or 6 of these little, or not actually quite big, screws that go into the wood there, and everything's super solid. I haven't had any issues with it warping or whatnot. But you definitely need to be 100% sure that you're measuring correctly on these things, because any kind of wood is never really about, like, you know, the size they say it is. So if you say it's a 2x4, it's not really a 2x4. So it's always best to measure the wood and make sure you have the proper dimensions. I actually made a mistake when I was building this tray. I didn't measure these ends, and I just assumed they were 3/4 of an inch. And so I just deducted 1.5 inches from the size I needed to make the floorboard. And when I put everything together, these trays were binding and they didn't work correctly. So definitely double check your measurements. Make sure everything has to be super precise and everything needs to be super square. Otherwise, these trays will bind, they won't lock. There's multiple issues that they'll have. So yeah. And as you can see, the tray here, this is again the 18mm Baltic birch plywood. The floor, or the base panel of this, is 12mm Baltic birch. And I covered it with speaker box carpet just to make it look a little bit nicer, and it also quiets down the back of the van from road noise and all of that. As you can see here, I mounted these little extensions for the bigger bikes like the snow bike and the mountain bike. And underneath you'll see another L-shaped bracket that's helping support it. They're also screwed down into the sides here with about 2.5-inch wood screws, about 4 of them, plus some wood glue. And they're pretty solid. I'm rocking the bike right now. You don't really see it flex at all. And to that I have these fork mounts mounted. Those are Kuat on that one because it's 150mm front axle spacing. On my mountain bike it's 110x15, and then on this bike it is a quick release so that I could put this fork up and mount my cross bike. And I wanted it, my cross bike or my road bike mounted here on a fork mount with a quick release, because that way I can swivel this back and forth. You can see there's very little clearance as I slide this bike back in. Yeah, everything just barely fits, so you just have to make sure everything's perfect. The wheel tray here is actually just made for a roof rack. I screwed it down into the bottom of the base here, and also have a screw or a bolt attaching one of the arms to make it a little bit stiffer. I actually don't even have it tight at the moment, but it wiggles a little bit, but it doesn't really hit anything. Then my front tire on my fat bike, I just have hooked up with these Velcro straps into the wall, just because it made a little bit more space in between the bikes. So with my front wheel on my mountain bike, it's just mounted to these little rags here with some Velcro straps to my bike. It's not that tight at the moment just because I haven't been doing any rough roads, so it hasn't really mattered. I also have these little Velcro straps that hold down the rear tires on all the bikes. You can see there's one for the cross bike, and there's one for the fat bike down there. So if you don't keep the bike strapped down like this, the bikes tend to walk or kind of move, especially on rough roads, and the cassette or the rotor will end up eating away at the bike next to it. And even the pedals, as you can see, are really close, and I've had problems with that before too. So in the demo van with 20 bikes, especially on a rough road, if any of these weren't strapped down, they'd collide in with each other, and you'd have some definite abrasions, not only in the paint, but if you got metal or carbon rubbing up against some sharp object, it's not really a good situation. So that's why they're there, and I recommend definitely keeping your bike strapped in, especially if you're doing some rough roads. These sliding bike trays, there's the extension you can see again. It's bolted down in, and they also have these locks. So if I press these locks down, the whole tray will go slide back in, and you can see just the minimal amount of clearance I have on everything here. But it's about 1/4 inch, I would say, in between that and the support we have. But as long as you make the clearance, everything fits great, and then you slide it all the way in and it locks. So it's not going anywhere, and it's just everything is conveniently under my bed. And you can see I also had to use dropper posts on the mountain bike and the fat bike, and on my cross bike I just take my seat off because there wasn't enough clearance. You can also just slam your seat down if you have enough space. I can do that, but I also have a carbon seat post, and I just don't feel like scraping it up all the time.